In a small, dusty town on the edge of nowhere, life moved slowly. People woke up early, worked hard all day, and went to bed tired but hopeful for tomorrow. Among them was a man who had spent his entire life fixing things: cars, trucks, tractors, anything with wheels or gears. He wasn't rich, famous, or even well-known outside his tiny community. But he had two things that mattered most: skill and heart. This mechanic lived in a modest house at the end of a quiet street. His garage, which doubled as his workshop, stood just a few steps away from his front door. It wasn't much: a corrugated, metal roof, walls patched together over the years, and tools scattered everywhere. But it was home to countless memories. This was where he learned his craft from his father, who had passed away years ago, leaving behind a legacy of hard work and integrity. Every morning, the mechanic rolled up the creaky garage door, letting sunlight spill onto oil-stained floors. Most days, customers trickled in one by one: farmers needing tractor repairs, neighbors with broken-down cars, or kids riding their bicycles who wanted help tightening loose screws. No job was too big or too small for him. If it needed fixing, he'd find a way. But despite his talent, life hadn't been kind to him. Bills piled up faster than he could pay them off. Debt collectors called often, their voices polite yet firm. His daughter, a bright-eyed girl who loved drawing pictures of airplanes and rockets, deserved better than what he could give her. She dreamed of becoming an engineer someday, but school fees were expensive and scholarships felt like distant hopes rather than real possibilities. Late nights became his routine. After tucking his daughter into bed, he'd return to the garage, working under dim light to finish repairs. Sometimes he'd sit alone on a stool staring at the wall, wondering if things would ever get easier. Would he always be stuck in this cycle of struggle? Or was there some unseen opportunity waiting around the corner? One evening, after another long day of fixing rusted mufflers and leaking radiators, the phone rang. The mechanic wiped grease off his hands before answering. On the other end, a voice asked if he could come to a private hangar nearby. There was a problem with a jet engine, and they needed someone reliable to fix it immediately. The mechanic froze for a moment. A jet engine? That wasn't exactly his area of expertise. Sure, he knew engines inside out, but jets were a whole different beast. Still, desperation pushed him to say yes. Every job paid something, and right now he needed every penny he could get. As he drove toward the hangar, doubts swirled in his mind. What if he messed up? What if the damage was beyond his ability to repair? Worst of all, what if he made things worse and cost these people thousands or maybe millions of dollars? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. When he arrived, the sight took his breath away. Standing before him was a gleaming private jet, its polished surface reflecting the moonlight. It looked more like a piece of art than a machine meant to fly through the skies. Mechanics in crisp uniforms bustled around, speaking in hushed tones about the issue. One of them approached him, explaining that a critical component deep within the engine had failed during pre-flight checks. Without immediate attention, the flight couldn't proceed. The mechanic nodded, trying to mask his nervousness. He grabbed his toolbox and stepped closer to the massive aircraft. As he examined the engine, he realized how intricate and delicate it was compared to anything he'd worked on before. Each part seemed perfectly designed, almost like a puzzle, waiting to be solved. For hours he worked tirelessly, crawling into tight spaces and using every ounce of knowledge he possessed. Sweat dripped from his brow as he focused intently, determined not to let fear or doubt take over. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered who owned such a luxurious plane. Was it a celebrity? A politician? Someone incredibly wealthy? Whoever it was, they must have important plans ahead. Little did he know, this simple act of repairing an engine would set off a chain reaction that would change his life forever. For now, though, he kept his head down, focusing on the task at hand. Fixing problems was what he did best, and tonight he wasn't going to stop until the job was done. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag, glancing up at the towering jet engine one last time. He had been working for hours, trying to figure out what was wrong with this high-tech machine. It wasn't like fixing a car or a tractor. This thing was a labyrinth of wires, pipes, and shiny metal parts that looked more like something from a sci-fi movie than anything he'd ever touched before. But he couldn't afford to back down now. The people waiting on him were relying on him, and so was the mysterious passenger inside the plane. It was late, and the hangar was eerily quiet except for the occasional hum of machinery and the sound of his tools clinking against each other. His fingers moved carefully over the engine, tightening bolts, adjusting components, and checking connections. Every movement felt deliberate, as though one wrong step could mean disaster. He didn't know much about private jets, but he knew enough about engines to understand how delicate they were. One mistake here could cost millions, or worse, put lives in danger. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder who exactly owned this jet. Who flew around in something so luxurious? Was it a celebrity? A politician? Someone insanely rich? Whoever it was, they must have important plans ahead. And yet, here he was, a nobody from a small town, tasked with making sure their journey went smoothly. The thought made him chuckle under his breath. Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back and gave the engine one last once-over. Everything seemed to be in place. With a deep breath, he signaled to one of the uniformed engineers standing nearby. "I think we're good," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "Let's test it." The engineer nodded and pressed a button on a control panel. The engine roared to life, vibrating through the hangar like thunder. For a moment, the mechanic held his breath, watching intently as the blades spun and the lights flickered green on the diagnostic screen. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. It worked. Against all odds, he had fixed it. Just then, the door to the jet opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and carried himself with an air of authority that demanded attention. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, landing briefly on the mechanic before turning to the engineers. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone clipped but calm. "Yes, sir," one of the engineers replied. "The issue has been resolved." The man nodded, seemingly satisfied, but instead of heading back into the plane, he walked toward the mechanic. Up close, the mechanic noticed the subtle details, the expensive watch on his wrist, the perfectly styled hair, the confident stance. This guy wasn't just wealthy, he radiated power. Still, there was something approachable about him, a hint of curiosity in his expression. "You're the one who fixed it?" the man asked, raising an eyebrow. The mechanic hesitated suddenly, aware of how greasy and disheveled he must look compared to this polished stranger. "Yeah, that's me," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just doing my job." The man studied him for a moment, then extended a hand. "Impressive work. I don't think many people could have handled that kind of pressure." Shaking the offered hand, the mechanic felt a mix of pride and disbelief. "Thanks. I've dealt with tougher situations, though usually not on something this fancy." A faint smirk played on the man's lips. "Well, maybe you'll get used to it. My name's—" He paused, then added simply, "Let's just say I appreciate talent when I see it." The mechanic chuckled nervously. "Fair enough. So, where are you headed?" "Somewhere important," the man replied vaguely, his gaze drifting toward the jet. "But let's talk about you for a moment. What brings someone like you to a place like this?" The question caught the mechanic off guard. No one had ever asked him about himself while he was covered in grease and oil. Usually people just wanted results, not personal stories. But something about this man's tone made him want to answer honestly. "I'm just trying to make ends meet," he admitted, shrugging. "Got a kid to take care of, bills piling up, you know how it is." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Not really, no, but I can imagine." There was no judgment in his voice, only genuine interest. "You seem good at what you do. Ever thought about doing more with it?" "More?" The mechanic frowned. "Like what?" "Big things. Bigger challenges. You clearly have the skills. It's just a matter of finding the right opportunities." For a second, the mechanic considered laughing it off. Big opportunities weren't exactly knocking on his door these days. But the man's words lingered in his mind, planting a tiny seed of possibility. "Maybe," just maybe, there was more to life than struggling paycheck to paycheck. Before he could respond, the man glanced at his watch. I should go. My schedule's tight as usual, but listen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it over. If you're interested in exploring those bigger challenges, give me a call. We might have something for you. The mechanic stared at the card, stunned. On it was a name, simple and elegant, and a phone number. Nothing flashy, but somehow it felt heavier than any piece of paper he'd ever held. Thanks, he said finally, tucking the card into his shirt pocket. I'll think about it. The man smiled, then turned and climbed back onto the jet. Within minutes, the engines roared again, and the plane began taxiing down the runway. As it lifted gracefully into the night sky, the mechanic stood there, staring after it, his mind racing with questions. Who was that guy? Why had he taken such an interest in him? And most importantly, should he actually call? For now, though, he pushed those thoughts aside. He still had a long drive home ahead of him, and his daughter would be waking up soon, ready for breakfast and another day of school. Life wasn't going to wait for him to figure everything out. But as he packed up his tools and headed for his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been different. Something big had shifted, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he was ready to face it head on. The mechanic sat in his old truck, the business card clutched tightly in his hand. The hangar lights had dimmed behind him, and the hum of the jet engine was now just a distant memory fading into the night sky. But his mind was anything but quiet. He kept replaying the conversation with the man on the jet, the way he'd spoken, the confidence in his voice, the casual offer that felt more like an invitation than mere politeness. He glanced at the card again. It was simple, almost too plain to belong to someone who traveled in such luxury. No flashy logo, no grand title, just a name and a phone number. Still, it carried weight. Something about the encounter lingered in his thoughts, gnawing at him like an unsolved puzzle. Who was this guy? Why had he taken the time to talk to someone like him, a nobody mechanic covered in grease and sweat? And what did he mean by bigger challenges? The drive home gave him plenty of time to think. His daughter would be asleep by now, curled, up in her bed with dreams of rockets and airplanes dancing in her head. She didn't know how hard he worked to keep their lives afloat, and he preferred it that way. He wanted her childhood to be filled with hope, not worry. But lately, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him harder than ever. Bills piled up, debts loomed, and opportunities seemed as rare as shooting stars. As he pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the darkened house. For the first time in ages, he allowed himself to imagine something different. What if this stranger's offer wasn't just empty words? What if it really could lead to something bigger? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Dreams were dangerous when you couldn't afford them, but the card stayed in his pocket. The next morning, life went on as usual. He woke up early, made breakfast for his daughter, and sent her off to school with a quick hug. Then he headed to the garage, where another day of fixing broken-down cars awaited him. The routine was comforting in its predictability, even if it left him bone-tired by evening. Yet, throughout the day, the image of that sleek jet and the mysterious man kept creeping into his mind. By late afternoon, he found himself standing in the middle of the garage, tools scattered around him, staring absently at the wall. A customer cleared his throat nearby, snapping him out of his daze. "Everything okay?" the man asked, holding up a busted radiator. Yeah, the mechanic replied quickly, grabbing the part. "Just thinking. That was all he seemed capable of doing lately. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that jet lifting off into the sky, carrying with it the possibility of a future he hadn't dared to dream about. And every time he opened them, reality hit him like a hammer. This was his life. This garage, these tools, this struggle. It was all he knew. Could he really walk away from it? Or worse, fail at whatever bigger challenges might come his way? That night, after tucking his daughter into bed, he sat alone at the kitchen table, the business card lying in front of him. He traced its edges with his fingers, debating whether to pick up the phone. Pride whispered that he didn't need anyone's help. He'd gotten this far on his own, hadn't he? But doubt countered that he'd only gotten this far because he hadn't let himself aim higher. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. His heart pounded as it rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as he was about to hang up, a voice answered. "Hello? It's me," the mechanic said, his voice shaking slightly. "The guy from the hangar. You gave me your card last night." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a chuckle. "I was wondering if you'd call. How's it going?" Fine," the mechanic stammered. "Look, I don't know what you're offering exactly, but I figured I should at least hear you out." "Smart move," the man replied smoothly. "Why don't we meet tomorrow? Dinner, maybe?" "My treat." Dinner? This whole situation felt surreal. The mechanic hesitated, unsure if he was stepping into something he couldn't handle, but curiosity got the better of him. "Sure," he said finally. "Where?" They agreed on a restaurant downtown, one that sounded far fancier than any place he'd ever eaten before. As he hung up the phone, he felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. What was he getting himself into? The next evening, he stood outside the restaurant feeling completely out of place. His best shirt still smelled faintly of motor oil, and his hands bore the permanent stains of years spent working with engines. Inside, waiters glided between tables, serving dishes that looked more like art than food. He spotted the man immediately. He was impossible to miss, sitting at a corner table with an easy smile. "You made it," the man said, standing to greet him. "Come on, sit down." The mechanic slid into the chair awkwardly, feeling like everyone in the room was staring at him. The man ordered wine without asking, then leaned back in his seat, studying him with those sharp eyes again. "So," he began, "tell me about yourself." It was a simple question, but it threw the mechanic off guard. No one had asked him that in years, not since his father passed away. Most people only cared about whether he could fix their car or tractor, not about who he was as a person. But this man seemed genuinely interested. "Well," the mechanic started slowly, "I've been fixing things my whole life. Learned from my dad mostly. After he died, I took over the garage. It's not much, but it keeps us going." "And your daughter?" the man prompted. "She's amazing," the mechanic said, his face softening. "Smart as a whip, always drawing pictures of planes and spaceships. Wants to be an engineer someday." The man nodded approvingly. "Good. Kids with big dreams are the best kind." He sipped his wine, then added, "You remind me of myself, you know. When I was starting out, I didn't have much either. Just grit and a willingness to learn." The mechanic raised an eyebrow. "Somehow I doubt you were fixing tractors back then." The man laughed. "No, but I was hustling, doing whatever it took to survive. You'd be surprised how many billionaires started right where you are now." The mechanic frowned. "I'm not looking to be a billionaire, I just want to give my kid a better shot at life than I had." "That's noble," the man said. "But why stop there? Why not aim higher? You've got skills most people would kill for. Imagine what you could do with the right resources." The idea was intoxicating and terrifying. The mechanic had spent his entire life playing it safe, sticking to what he knew. Taking risks wasn't something he was used to. But the man across the table radiated confidence, as if he believed in possibilities the mechanic couldn't yet see. "What exactly are you proposing?" the mechanic asked cautiously. The man leaned forward, his expression serious. "I run a company that deals with some of the most advanced technology in the world. Jets, yachts, industrial equipment, you name it. We need people like you. People who can solve problems others can't. If you're willing to step out of your comfort zone, I'll make sure you succeed." It sounded too good to be true. Too easy. Too risky. The mechanic stared at his plate, torn between fear and hope. Finally, he looked up. "Why me?" There must be hundreds of guys better qualified than I am. Qualifications don't matter, the man said firmly. What matters is heart, drive, passion. Those are things you can't teach. And I saw all of that in you last night. For the first time in years, the mechanic felt seen, not just as a handyman or a struggling parent, but as someone with potential. Someone who mattered. I'll think about it, he said quietly. But deep down, he already knew his answer. The mechanic didn't sleep much that night. His mind raced with possibilities, doubts, and questions. He replayed every moment of the dinner in his head, the way the man had spoken to him, the confidence in his voice, the promise of something. Bigger, better, more meaningful than anything he'd ever known. But alongside the excitement came fear. Fear of failure. Fear of stepping too far outside his comfort zone. Fear of letting down not just himself but his daughter, who depended on him for everything. By morning, though, the decision was clear. He couldn't keep living the same life forever, hoping things would magically improve. If he wanted a shot at giving his daughter the future she deserved, he had to take risks, even if it meant walking away from the only world he'd ever known. So, after dropping her off at school, he called the number again. This time, his voice was steadier when he spoke. "I'm in," he said simply. "Tell me what's next." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a satisfied chuckle. "Good choice," the man replied. "Meet me at my office tomorrow morning. We'll go over the details." The next day, the mechanic found himself standing outside a towering, glass building in the heart of the city. It was nothing like the dusty streets or worn-down garages he was used to. People rushed past him in sharp suits, clutching briefcases and coffee cups, while sleek cars pulled up to the entrance one after another. He felt out of place, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture. But he reminded himself why he was here, to build a better life for his family, and took a deep breath before walking inside. The lobby was pristine, all polished marble floors and gleaming elevators. A receptionist greeted him with a warm smile and directed him to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into an expansive office suite where the man was waiting, seated behind a massive desk. The view behind him was breathtaking. Skyscrapers, stretching toward the horizon, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "You made it," the man said, rising to shake his hand. "Welcome to the beginning of something great." The mechanic managed a nervous smile. "Thanks, I hope so." They sat down, and the man wasted no time getting straight to the point. "Here's the deal. We're launching a new division focused on cutting-edge mechanical innovation. Think beyond fixing jets. We're talking about designing systems that haven't even been dreamed of yet. You'll be part of the team leading this effort, working directly with engineers, designers, and some of the brightest minds in the industry." The mechanic blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. "Wait, me? Leading anything?" "Yes, you," the man said firmly. "You've got instincts most people lack. You see problems differently, approach them creatively. That's exactly what we need. Of course, there will be training. You won't be expected to know everything right away. But trust me, you'll catch on quickly. Training, new skills, advanced technology." It sounded overwhelming, but also exhilarating. For years, he'd been stuck in the same routine, limited by the tools and resources available to him. Now, suddenly, he was being handed access to knowledge, expertise, and opportunities he could barely comprehend. "But what about my garage?" he asked hesitantly. "It's all I've ever had. I can't just walk away from it." The man nodded, understanding flashing across his face. "You don't have to abandon it entirely. In fact, I think it could play a role in this. Imagine turning your garage into a training center, a place where young mechanics learn modern techniques and innovative thinking. We'll fund it, provide equipment, connect you with experts. You'd still be doing what you love, but on a much larger scale." The idea struck a chord deep within him. His father had taught him everything he knew, passing down skills that had kept their family afloat for generations. What if he could do the same for others? What if he could create opportunities for kids in his community, just like someone was creating one for him now? "I like that," he said softly. A lot. Good, the man replied, leaning back in his chair. Because I want you to succeed. Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden. Over the next few weeks, the mechanic dove headfirst into his new role. It wasn't easy. The learning curve was steep, and there were days when he wondered if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. But the man was true to his word. He provided guidance, encouragement, and endless patience. Slowly but surely, the mechanic began to adapt, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. He spent hours poring over blueprints, attending workshops, and collaborating with engineers who spoke a language he barely understood at first. Yet, despite the challenges, he thrived. There was something intoxicating about solving problems on such a grand scale, about seeing ideas come to life in ways he'd never imagined possible. And as he grew more confident, he realized something else. He wasn't just fixing machines anymore. He was building solutions that could change lives. At the same time, he worked tirelessly to transform his old garage into the training center the man had envisioned. With funding and support, he upgraded the space, filling it with state-of-the-art tools and equipment. He reached out to local schools, offering free classes and mentorship programs for students interested in mechanics and engineering. Word spread quickly, and soon kids from all over town were showing up, eager to learn. One evening, as he watched a group of teenagers tinkering with engines, their faces alight with curiosity and determination, he felt a surge of pride. These were the dreamers, the problem solvers of tomorrow. And he was helping them find their footing just as someone had done for him. His daughter noticed the change in him almost immediately. Gone was the constant weight of worry that used to hang over him. In its place was a spark of excitement, a sense of purpose that hadn't existed before. "Dad," she said one night at dinner, "you seem happier lately." He smiled, ruffling her hair. "I am, kiddo. Things are finally looking up." She grinned back, her eyes shining. "Does this mean I can start building rockets now?" He laughed. "Not quite yet, but maybe someday." As months turned into years, the mechanic's life transformed in ways he never could have predicted. He went from being a struggling single parent to a respected innovator, someone whose work inspired others and pushed boundaries. The man who had given him the opportunity became not just a mentor but a friend, someone who believed in him even when he doubted himself. But through it all, the mechanic never forgot where he came from. Every success, every achievement reminded him of the journey that had brought him here. The late nights in the garage, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt and despair. And every time he looked at his daughter, now excelling in school and dreaming bigger than ever, he knew it had all been worth it. Because sometimes life hands you a chance to rewrite your story. All you have to do is take it. Years had passed since that fateful night at the hangar. The mechanic's life was almost unrecognizable now. What started as a single phone call had turned into a journey of growth, resilience, and transformation, not just for him, but for everyone around him. He still couldn't believe how far he'd come. From fixing rusted car engines in a dusty garage to leading teams of engineers working on cutting-edge technology, his story felt like something out of a movie. But it wasn't just about the shiny new office or the fancy titles. It was about the impact he was making. Every day he woke up knowing he was doing work that mattered, work that could change lives. And while he loved the thrill of innovation, his heart remained rooted in the small town where it all began. His training center had become a beacon of hope for young people eager to learn and grow. Kids who once thought their dreams were too big for their circumstances now saw possibilities everywhere they looked. One afternoon, the mechanic stood inside the revamped garage-turned-training center, watching a group of teenagers huddled around a sleek prototype engine. They were testing its performance, tweaking settings, and debating improvements with the kind of enthusiasm he remembered from his own youth. Only this time, they weren't limited by outdated tools or lack of resources. Thanks to the funding and support he'd secured, these kids had access to everything they needed to bring their ideas to life. A young girl caught his eye. She reminded him so much of his daughter when she was younger. Her hands moved deftly over the engine, adjusting components with precision while explaining her thought process to the others. She spoke with confidence, her eyes lighting up as she described how her design could improve fuel efficiency. It filled him with pride to see her shine, knowing she might one day revolutionize the industry. As he watched, someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was the man, the same one who had changed his life years ago. Now older, with a few more gray hairs, he still carried himself with the same quiet authority. "Looks like you're doing good work here," he said, nodding toward the students. The mechanic smiled. "They're the ones doing the hard work. I'm just giving them a chance." "A chance is all anyone really needs," the man replied, thoughtfully. "You should know that better than anyone." The mechanic nodded, thinking back to his own journey. If someone hadn't believed in him when he least expected it, none of this would have been possible. That realization hit him often, reminding him to pay it forward whenever he could. "So, what's next?" the man asked, leaning against a nearby table. "You've built something incredible here, but I can tell you're not done yet." The mechanic chuckled. "Why does everyone always assume I'm planning something?" "Because you are," the man shot back with a grin. "You're restless, always looking for the next challenge. Don't think I haven't noticed." He wasn't wrong. Despite all he'd accomplished, the mechanic couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to do. He'd seen firsthand how technology could transform industries and communities. But what if they took it a step further? What if they used their skills to tackle bigger problems? Things like clean energy, sustainable transportation, or affordable housing? The possibilities seemed endless. "I've been thinking," the mechanic admitted after a moment. "What if we expanded beyond mechanics, not just teaching kids to fix things, but showing them how to innovate solutions for real-world issues? Imagine designing machines that don't just run faster but also protect the planet, or creating systems that make life easier for people who need it most." The man raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That's ambitious, but I like it." "It's not just ambition," the mechanic continued. "It's necessity. Look at the world. We're running out of time to fix some of these problems. If we don't act now, who will?" For a long moment, the man didn't say anything. Then he smiled, clapping a hand on the mechanic's shoulder. "You never stop surprising me. Let's do it. Whatever resources you need, consider them yours." With those words, the mechanic knew he was stepping into uncharted territory again. Expanding the training center's focus meant taking on even greater challenges, navigating complex systems and rallying support from people who might not understand the vision right away. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He'd faced impossible odds before and come out stronger on the other side. Over the next several months, he poured his energy into turning the idea into reality. He collaborated with environmental experts, urban planners, and tech innovators, learning as much as he could about sustainability and social impact. Together, they developed programs that combined hands-on technical training with lessons in problem-solving, creativity, and empathy. Students weren't just taught how to build machines, they were encouraged to think about why they were building them and how those creations could benefit society. Word spread quickly, drawing attention from far beyond the small town. Journalists wrote articles about the groundbreaking initiative. Universities offered scholarships to standout students. Even government officials visited, eager to learn how they could replicate the model elsewhere. For the mechanic, it was validation that he was on the right path, but the true reward came from seeing the difference it made in people's lives. One evening, as he locked up the training center after another busy day, he paused to look around. The space buzzed with activity, laughter, and the hum of machinery. Posters lined the walls showcasing student projects ranging from solar-powered vehicles to water filtration systems. It was alive with possibility, a testament to what could happen when people dared to dream big. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his daughter. "Dad, check your email." Curious, he pulled out his phone and opened the message. Attached was a photo of her standing in front of a university building wearing a cap and gown. She'd graduated top of her class, earning a scholarship to study engineering. Beneath the picture was a simple note. "Thanks for believing in me and for showing me what's possible." Tears welled up in his eyes as he stared at the screen. All the sacrifices, late nights, and risks had led to this moment. His little girl, the one who used to draw pictures of airplanes and rockets, was now ready to take flight herself. The mechanic walked home slowly that night, the cool air soothing his tired body. As he passed familiar streets and landmarks, he reflected on how much had changed and how much stayed the same. The town was still small, the skies still wide open, but somewhere along the way he'd found his purpose. He'd built something lasting, something that would continue to inspire long after he was gone. When he reached his house, he sat on the porch steps, gazing up at the stars. Somewhere out there, planes were flying, carrying passengers to destinations unknown. Engines roared, wheels turned, and lives moved forward. And in the middle of it all was a man who had once been just a struggling mechanic, trying to make ends meet. Now he was proof that no matter where you start, you can reach heights you never imagined. All it takes is courage, determination, and sometimes a little help from someone who believes in you. The years flew by faster than the mechanic ever imagined. What had once been a small training center in a dusty garage was now a sprawling facility known across the country. People came from all over to see the place where dreams were turned into reality, where kids who once thought their futures were limited by circumstance became engineers, inventors, and leaders. The mechanic still couldn't believe it sometimes. He'd spent most of his life fixing broken things, but now he was building something that would last for generations. One crisp morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, the mechanic stood outside the training center, watching students pour in through the gates. Some carried backpacks stuffed with notebooks and tools. Others held tablets loaded with blueprints and designs. Their faces glowed with excitement, curiosity, and purpose. They weren't just learning how to repair engines or assemble machines. They were solving problems, tackling challenges, and creating solutions that mattered. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see the man, the same one who had given him his first big break, standing beside him. Over the years, their relationship had grown from mentorship to friendship. The man no longer wore the sharp suits and polished shoes that had intimidated the mechanic during their first meeting. Instead, he dressed casually, blending in with the crowd of students and instructors. Age had softened his features, but his eyes still sparkled with the same sharp intelligence and quiet confidence. "You did it," the man said simply, gesturing toward the bustling scene around them. "This is your legacy." The mechanic shook, his head smiling. "Not mine alone, you played a part in this too. If you hadn't believed in me back then—" "Believing in you wasn't hard," the man interrupted. "You had everything you needed inside you already, I just gave you a nudge." "A pretty big nudge," the mechanic joked, earning a chuckle from the man. They stood there for a moment, taking it all in. Students laughed and chatted as they worked on projects ranging from renewable energy systems to affordable housing prototypes. Teachers guided them patiently, encouraging questions and experimentation. In the corner of the courtyard, a group of young girls tested a drone they'd built themselves, cheering loudly when it hovered steadily above the ground. It was chaos, but beautiful, productive chaos. Later that day, the mechanic found himself standing at a podium inside a large auditorium. Hundreds of people filled the seats: students, parents, teachers, local officials, and even reporters eager to document the event. Today marked the grand opening of an expanded wing of the training center, funded entirely by donations and partnerships. This new space would house advanced labs, classrooms, and workshops designed to tackle some of the world's toughest challenges, from climate change to healthcare access. As he looked out at the sea of faces, the mechanic felt a lump rise in his throat. Public speaking wasn't his thing. He much preferred tinkering with engines or mentoring students one-on-one. But today, he knew he owed it to everyone who had helped him along the way to say a few words. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "When I started this journey, I never dreamed we'd be here today. Back then, my biggest worry was keeping the lights on in my garage. Now we're lighting up entire communities, not just with knowledge, but with hope." He paused, scanning the room. His daughter sat in the front row, beaming proudly. Beside her were some of the very first students who had walked through the doors of the old garage-turned-training center. Many of them had gone on to start their own businesses, lead research teams, or design groundbreaking technologies. Seeing them together reminded him of why he'd kept pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible. "This place isn't about me," he continued. "It's about all of you. About what happens when people come together to support each other, share ideas, and dream bigger than they ever thought possible. We started with nothing but determination and grit, and look at us now. Look at what we've built." Applause erupted, echoing through the auditorium. The mechanic stepped back from the podium, letting others take the stage to share their stories. One by one, former students and community members spoke about how the training center had changed their lives. A young woman talked about how she'd grown up thinking college was out of reach until a scholarship program made it possible. A father shared how his son, once unsure of his future, now led a team developing sustainable farming equipment. Each story added another layer to the tapestry of impact the mechanic had unknowingly woven. After the speeches, the crowd moved outside for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Cameras flashed as the mechanic and the man stood side by side, oversized scissors in hand. Together they snipped the red ribbon stretched across the entrance of the new wing. Cheers erupted and balloons soared into the sky, painting the air with color. As the festivities wound down, the mechanic wandered away from the crowd, seeking a moment of quiet. He ended up near the old garage, now preserved as a museum showcasing the history of the training center. Inside, visitors could see photos, tools, and memorabilia from the early days, including the grease-stained rag he'd used to wipe his hands after fixing that jet engine years ago. Standing there, surrounded by memories, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had thrown him curveballs, forced him to make sacrifices, and tested him in ways he never expected. But it had also given him opportunities, friendships, and moments of pure joy. Most importantly, it had shown him that even the smallest actions, a late-night repair, a phone call, a leap of faith, could create ripples that touched countless lives. The man joined him a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thinking about the past?" he asked, handing one over. "Yeah," the mechanic replied, sipping the warm drink. "Hard to believe how far we've come." "We've come a long way," the man agreed. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much more to do." The mechanic nodded, gazing toward the new wing buzzing with activity. "I guess that's the thing about progress. You're never really done. There's always another problem to solve, another dream to chase. And you'll keep chasing them," the man said firmly, "because that's who you are." A moment. Neither of them spoke. The sound of laughter drifted over from the celebration, mingling with the hum of machinery and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was a perfect snapshot of the present, rooted in the struggles of the past and pointing toward the promise of the future. That night, as the mechanic tucked his daughter into bed, she smiled sleepily up at him. "Dad," she murmured, "you're my hero." He kissed her forehead, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, sweetheart, you're mine." And for the first time in a long time, he truly believed it.